the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Joining me today on Trending is Father Robert Spitzer. He's the founder and president of the Magus Center, always providing incredible arguments in favor of our faith and in a reasonable way, often even tying in the science behind our faith. And it's interesting because modern culture believes that science and faith are incompatible. And I was actually even just in conversation with people the other night, and there's criticism of the church in some of the conversation I was having about how there's a complaint that, the church doesn't engage enough with science and scientific arguments. But that's what's fascinating. The church is so ahead of science. And one of those arguments I think could be made here is even looking to the scientific proof. Did you know there's scientific proof for the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ? Have you ever heard of the burial cloths of Christ, the Shroud of Turin, and the Sudarian of Oviedo? They're two burial cloths that we read about in the Gospel according to John in the Resurrection Discourse, where we have this historical documentation that when Jesus Christ is risen from the dead, left behind there in the tomb are his burial cloths. They find the empty tomb, but there, just wadded up in the corner of the tomb, are these two burial cloths. Now, a little bit of historical context, you would find a corpse left behind because that wouldn't be of any financial gain, but you would see burial cloths and various things such as that included in the burial cloths or buried with the body that would have been stolen because they were worth a lot of money. The corpse wouldn't be worth anything. And so it's another one of those arguments for proof of the resurrection. But there's so much more when it comes to scientific data. So joining me today to dive in is Father Robert Spitzer, the founder and president of the Magus Center. Father Spitzer, welcome to Trending. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you. And Timmerie, it's just been a wonderful Easter, I think, all the way around. And I have to say, he has risen as he promised. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
And the evidence is there on the shroud, all right. No question about it.
And this is what I love at hearing how you explain this, because the science is phenomenal when it comes to the evidence. And I'd love for you to explain a little bit about, maybe if you start off with the difference between the two burial cloths and then get into some of the data between the two of them.
Yeah. Well, the Shroud of Turin, which of course is the major one, because the shroud has both an image and bloodstains. So we can see that there are 372 bloodstains on the Shroud of Turin, and they're in perfect anatomical conformity with the image that's on the cloth. Now, oddly enough, on the Shroud of Turin, the actual burial cloth, that's the full front and the full back image of the man in the shroud, who, of course, I believe very much is Jesus Christ. The 372 bloodstains that are there resemble Jesus' unique crucifixion. Now, the image is completely different. As I said, the blood went on the cloth first, then the image follows. It makes it practically impossible that a forger could have done this because, of course, how, for example, would a medieval forger even know how to get 372 bloodstains anatomically perfect without an image on the cloth, and then have the image like a full day and a half later arrive on the shroud after the blood? I mean, that's one of the first things. The second thing, again, on this burial cloth, is that image is floating, practically speaking, on the very uppermost surface of the fibrils. So in other words, the image never penetrates to the middle of the fibers or to the middle of the cloth. It's sitting there right on the uppermost surface of the fibrils of the cloth. So you know right away a liquid could never produce it. It was a liquid that produced the image. It would have gone right into the, penetrated right into the threads and into the cloth. And the same thing with like a vapor. A vapor would automatically penetrate not only into the cloth and into the threads, it would have actually, blurred the image because a vapor, of course, would lose its fixity as it's moving from the surface of the body to the cloth. And so you'd have a very much a blurriness in adjacent threads and fibers. So that clearly can't be the explanation. Again, thirdly, it couldn't have been scorching or something of that nature because we have a fluorescing test that makes it very obvious whether a cloth has been burned or not, and the shroud has not been burned. There's no scorching or anything resembling scorching. It couldn't be a rub for similar reasons, etc. So at the end of the day, you're just left with only one explanation. You're going to have to, the image on the shroud, as I said, the sudarium does not have an image. It only has the bloodstains. But we'll talk about the sudarium in just 1 second. But for the moment, that image on the shroud, it has to be produced by radiation. Now, the radiation's got to be a very special kind of radiation because, as we shall see in a moment, it's capable. It's not just a radiation that's coming from the surface of the body that's creating the image. It's radiation that's coming from inside the body. So we can see, for example, the backbone in the man, and we can see that backbone inside the man in perfect three-dimensional proportionality to the flesh surrounding the backbone. And then, of course, we can see, the cloth does not have to touch the body in order for the image to be produced. So that guarantees that it has to be radiation that produces the image, because action at a distance is basically the definition of what radiation does. So you can see that the surface is producing the image without the cloth ever touching the body. So you can see pretty much, okay, it's got to be radiation, and it's got to get that inside of the body as well as the outside of the body. Now, there's several enigmas on this image that I could go into, but there's only two theories that will be capable of explaining this. They come from very reputable physicists. The first group of physicists is John Jackson, and he and his crew of physicists, a lot of them from the Los Alamos lab in New Mexico, were part of the 1978 STIRP investigation. And they proposed that the kind of radiation that could do this was columnated ultraviolet, we'll call it vacuum ultraviolet radiation. So this is a kind of radiation which is very short, super short pulsations, like 1/40 of a second, and I'll explain that in just a moment. But more than that, it's going to have to be a very intense radiation, around 6 to 8 billion, that's with a B, billion watts. Now, of course, that's like 500,000 searchlights worth of light energy coming out of that body for 1/40 of a second. That's what could create it. And in 2010, by the way, Paolo Di Lazzaro and his group from the Italian National Labs, another group of physicists, actually proved that this could, in fact, produce an image, detailed, specific image in a cloth with a similar spectral reflectance to the shroud. So essentially, you can see that this is quite remarkable. I mean, how many dead bodies do you know produce 500,000 searchlights worth of light energy for 1/40 of a second? The answer is 0, except the one on the shroud, if that's the explanation. There's a second group that Dr. Kitty Little at Harwell Labs in Great Britain, Dr. Jean-Baptiste Renaudot at the Institut Physique in Paris, and Dr. Arthur Lind here in the United States, among others, who have what's called the particle radiation hypothesis. That's the other hypothesis. Again, it's equally miraculous. I mean, it's essentially that at one point, right? So sometime like a day or more after the blood has been deposited and dried on the shroud, the body underwent what we call a low-temperature nuclear reaction. In other words, the body underwent simultaneous nuclear disintegration. That means that all 7 octillions, that's like a trillion, different perfectly stable atomic nuclei. All of those stable atomic nuclei suddenly underwent nuclear disintegration at the same time. Now, you say, well, what are the odds of that happening? Well, It's about the same as a monkey typing the first two scenes of Macbeth perfectly by random tapping of the keys in a single try. So highly unusual that something like that would happen. But anyway, you'd have gotten a light, you'd have gotten a big boom, and then all the particles that constituted the physical body would then be dispersed. The neutrons would go through the cloth and strengthen the cloth and turn the blood bright red by irradiating it. And all of the deuterons and protons, the positively charged heavy particles, they're going to go and stop right at the surface of the fibrils and create the image. And that image, I mean, literally, Jesus would be leaving us as his body's moving from physical body to a spiritual body. He's leaving us with the remnants, the particle remnants in the cloth itself, which is producing the image, this perfect three-dimensional photographic negative image on a non-photographically sensitive linen cloth. Now, I'm telling you, this image is the most scientifically tested image by far in the world, by far. I mean, hundreds of tests. And secondly, it is the most unique image in the world. There's no explanation for it other than these two highly unusual bursts of radiation. Now, whether it be particle radiation or vacuum ultraviolet radiation, they're both like miraculous. Bodies don't do that. Monkeys don't type the first two scenes of Macbeth perfectly in a single try. So, the key thing is we've got something that's just absolutely wonderful. It's actually recording this remarkable event of Jesus moving, from his physical to spiritual state, leaving behind this remnant of his physical body as an image. Now, as I said, this correlates just perfectly with the blood that's on the shroud. So, in other words, the blood is anatomically coordinated, if I can put it that way, with the image in a perfect way. No medieval forger could possibly have the anatomical knowledge to do this if he wanted to.
And they match the wounds, right? The wounds that we know of.
That's right. The unique wounds of Jesus' crucifixion. So you can actually see on this cloth, you can see, for example, the spear wound. And you can tell it's going up between the fifth and the sixth ribs, right? Because the image tells us exactly those ribs, where they are. You can see the spear proceeding. It's an elliptical, headed spear like the legionnaires used to use. It's going up at a 30-degree angle, going into the thoracic cavity. You can see that it nicks the heart on the way up, and then as it goes even further, it hits the pulmonary sac, right, the pleural sac. And, of course, the pleural sac's under a great deal of pressure because the man has been trying to raise himself in order to breathe because he's being crucified. Well, when it nicks the heart and then goes to the pleural sac, first the blood will squirt out of that wound, and then the pleural fluid, which it looks transparent to the biblical author John, who reports it and says, hey, the guy who saw this, his witness is true. And blood and water came out of this wound. And you can see right there surrounding that wound, you can actually see the blood is there near the center, and then around the blood is the pleural fluid that still remains there from 2,000 years ago. And literally confirming the testimony. I just want to give you, the crown of thorns. That crown is woven with what we call the Syrian Christ thorn. It's a very curved, sharp thorn that's, intrinsic to the reason. The pollen fossils, almost 3/4 of the pollen grains that are embedded in the shroud are from that area. There, 14 are indigenous to that region. 4 have never been found anywhere beyond Jerusalem and northern Judea. Then you look at the flagrum, the wounds from the scourging. It is absolutely unbelievable to see that the man was whipped 39 times with a whip that has 3 strands. One man on his left, one man on his right, whipping left and then right and then left and then right. The man loses so much blood because there's little lead dumbbells attached to the end of the the strands, and when they pull that whip back, it's just shredding his flesh as it's coming out. You can see the contusion on his shoulder, and the scrapes on his knees. The man clearly was tripped, lurched forward, and smashed onto the ground. The blunt object sitting on his shoulder goes right up in the air, bam, comes down and literally dislocates his shoulder, forcing it. You can see the 11-degree slope in the right shoulder, and you can see that his head was just twisted to the left, and his right eye gets sucked into its orbit. You can just tell it's Jesus' crucifixion, his utterly unique crucifixion writ large in anatomical writing between the coordination of the blood and the image. Truly, truly a remarkable image. If it's not the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, I mean, the odds of it not being that are like monkey typing whatever, the first page of Shakespeare, by random tapping of the keys. There's just so many coincidences and so many anatomical, inexplicable events that need a miracle in order to explain it. But yeah, the resurrection and the crucifixion are just writ large on this great, great relic that is the most scientifically tested historical artifact in the world.
Father Spitzer, thank you for taking a deep dive into this, because I think it goes to show that if you know someone who's struggling with skepticism as we celebrate this great season of Easter, or maybe they're bitter when they're stuck going to church with family and they're there just showing up to do a little bit of lip service for family members, that here is a scientific proof of Dad saying, here, debunk this and make an argument with some of that very scientific proof that modern day culture asks. That's been Father Spitzer here on Trending. If you'd like to look at him and his work, you can head over to magicenter.com. He's the founder and president of the Magis Center, including the author of countless books. Head over to magis.center.com, and we'll include a link to the Magis Center touching on 5 of the great proofs of the Shroud of Turin if you'd like to take a little bit deeper of a dive. This entire episode of Trending with Timmerie is on the Relevant Radio app. The Relevant Radio app is completely free and updated daily with fresh articles, podcasts, and prayers. Don't delay, download the app today, and thanks for listening.